Okay, hold on one sec. All right, welcome. We're just gonna get into it. We got a lot of things I want to try and read tonight, so let's see how far we get. This is from Corinthians, Corinthians 13. It's a very famous. I guess we call it a prayer. It's more of a section of a letter from Saint Paul, who was a murderer and a theologian. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burnt, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long, and it is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth, but whether there'll be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there'll be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there'll be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child. I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three, but the greatest of these is charity. And again, that's from the King James. Charity is often translated as love. Also, I love the music of that. It's so beautiful to start with just such a powerful line. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, it's it's you know. I was actually reading a list of all the phrases that came to the English language out of the King James Bible, and some people think that Shakespeare uh, wrote part of it, or I'm not sure if they still do or what they think. But in terms of introducing things to the English language that are first found in the King James Bible, that's definitely the case. There's a ton of really vivid images that, just like Shakespeare, people use constantly to this day. But yeah, that you know, what an incredible writer. Just as a great modern writer David Milch said, makes it come alive, and the words really are alive. They really are. It's incredibly beautiful. I love that. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. There's certainly something lost. And the hope, really the faith that it can be made whole. All right. So that's the first thing on the list. Um, this is a passage from Cormac McCarthy's book Blood Meridian, which is a very famous, incredibly violent novel. Passage I'm going to read doesn't really have any violence to it. Not that I. It's one of the rare pages that doesn't. So again, if you're going to read this one, it's not for the faint of heart. But this is, I just kind of want to demonstrate the language of it because it's basically this young man, the kid is the character, the protagonist of the story. He gets separated from the people he's with, who's a band of murderers, and he's just wandering in the desert by himself on foot. Okay, so this is page 215. When he went on again, the fire seemed to recede before him. A troop of figures passed between him and the light. Then again, wolves perhaps, he went on. It was a lone tree burning on the desert, a heraldic tree that the passing storm had let afire. Solitary pilgrim drawn up before it had traveled far to be here, and he knelt in the hot sand and held his numbed hands out while all about in that circle attended companies of lesser auxiliaries routed forth into the inordinate day. Small owls that crouched silently and stood from foot to foot, and tarantulas and sulpicas and vinegaroons, and the vicious mygal spiders and beaded lizards with mouth black as a chow dog's, deadly to man, and the little desert basilisks that jet blood from their eyes, and the small sand vipers like seemly gods, silent and the same in Jeddah, in Babylon. A constellation of ignited eyes that edged the ring of light, all bound in a precarious truce before this torch whose brightness had set back the stars in their sockets. Again, another example of a writer, very gifted writer, but of a work that just, there's not a moment of it that doesn't have this inherent genius to it, this growing quality, and um, do you know what? I was gonna look up something else, but and I actually wasn't planning on doing this one tonight. But I just want to say that when you get to certain kinds of books and how there's this seeming perfection to them, or you could just call it perfection. I definitely think it is, where um, where the beginning, the end, and every spot in between has the same kind of voice to it. That you know would seem like divine inspiration. So let's see. This is from. Okay, where are we gonna get this one? Let's just type it in. Call me. So this is the beginning of Moby Dick. Oh, let's just type in Loomings. Yep. There we go. Okay. So this is chapter one, and just listen to the sounds and the images that the poem, whatever this is, conjures up. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, I always think about that line. Whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. Then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in it. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, sometime or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. There now is your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves as Indian isles by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. He's talking about Manhattan. It's 1850. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mall is washed by waves and cooled by breezes, which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water gazers there. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. What a freaking sentence. Go from Collier's Hook to County's Slip, and from thence by Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posted silence like silent sentinels all around the town. Stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reveries, some leaning against the spiles, some seated upon the pierheads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging, as if striving to get a still better seaward peep. But these are all landsmen of weekdays pent up in lath and plaster, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How then is this? Are the green fields gone? What do they here? But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water, seemingly bound for a dive. Strange. Nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No. They must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues, inlanders all. They come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles of the compasses of all those ships attract them thither? Once more, say you are in the country, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a dale, and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged in his deepest reveries. Stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment if your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor. Yes, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. And here's an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in all the valley of the Saco. What is the chief element he employs? There stand his trees, each with a hollow trunk as if a hermit and a crucifix were within, and here sleeps his meadow, and there sleep his cattle, and up from yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep into distant woodlands winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. But though the picture lies thus tranced, though the pine trees shakes down its sigh like leaves upon the shepherd's head, yet all were vain unless the shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee-deep among tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water. There is not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel your 1,000 miles to see it? Why did the poor poet of Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving 2 handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or other crazy to go to sea? Why, upon your first voyage as a passenger, did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration? When first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land, why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity, an own brother of Job? Surely, all this is not without meaning. And still deeper meaning in that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life. And this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes, I do not begin to be overconscious of my lungs. I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger, you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep at nights, do not enjoy themselves much as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger, nor, though I am something of a salt, do I ever go to sea as a commodore, or a captain, or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. It is quite as much as I can do to take care of myself without taking care of ships, barks, brigs, schooners, and what not. As for going as a cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that, a cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancied broiling fowls. Though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and judgmatically salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverentially, of a broiled fowl than I will. It is out of the idolatrous dotings of the old Egyptians upon broiled ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in their huge bakehouses, the pyramids. No, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down in the forecastle, aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some, and make me jump from spar to spar like a grasshopper in a May meadow. And at first, this sort of thing is unpleasant enough. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you come from an old established family in the land. The Van Rensselaers, or Randolphs, or the Hardicanutes. And more than all, if just previous to putting your hand into the tar pot, you have been lording it as a country schoolmaster, making the tallest boys stand in awe of you. The transition is a keen one, I assure you, from a schoolmaster to a sailor, and requires a strong decoction of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. But even this wears off in time. What of it? If some old hunk of a sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks, what does that indignity amount to? Weighed, I mean, in the scales of the New Testament. Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything the less of me because I promptly and respectfully obey that old hunks in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else is one way or other served in much the same way, either in a physical or metaphysical point of view. That is, and so the universal thump is passed around, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay, and there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid. The act of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchard thieves entailed upon us. But being paid? What will compare with it? The urbane activity with which a man receives money is really marvelous, considering, as we so earnestly believe, money to be the root of all earthly ills. And then on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. Finally, I always go to school, sea as a sailor, because of the wholesome exercise and pure air of the forecastle decks. For as in this world, headwinds are far more prevalent than winds from astern. That is, if you never violate the Pythagorean maxim. So, for the most part, the Commodore on the quarterdeck gets his atmosphere at second hand from the sailors on the forecastle. He thinks he breathes it first, but not so. In much the same way, to the commonality of their leaders in many other things, at the same time that the leaders little suspected. But wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the air as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer, the Fates, who has the constant surveillance of me and secretly dogs me and influences me in some unaccountable way, he can better answer than anyone else. And doubtless my going on this whaling voyage formed part of the grand program of Providence that was drawn up a long time ago. It came in as a sort of brief interlude and solo between more extensive performances. I take it that this part of the bill must have run something like grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan, though I cannot tell why it is exactly that those stage managers, the Fates, put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage, when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies, and short and easy parts in genteel comedies, and jolly parts in farces, though I cannot tell you why this was exactly. Yet now that I recall all the circumstances, I think I can see a little into the springs and motives which, being cunningly presented to me under various disguises, induced me to set about performing the part I did. Besides cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas, where he rolled, his island in bulk, the undeliverable, nameless perils of the whale, these, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps, such things would not have been inducements. But as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I live to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I'm quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it, could they let me. Since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of the place one lodges in. By reason of these things, Then the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, two and two, there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and midmost of them all one grand hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air. That's chapter one. The images just keep coming. The music of it, the constant like repetition of sounds, bouncing off each other. And a little bit you'll get more of it more later on of you know take introducing you to a word, a sound, or a phrase in a sentence, and then reconstructing those sounds into something else. Equally or more vivid. So yeah, that's chapter one of Moby Dick, and again, not a book you're gonna read once and enjoy. It's something you kind of have to keep reading, and you know the more you um, the more you read it, it's like a poem. There's a meditative quality to it, and a vividness, and a kind of stage in your mind that grows every time you see it. And this one, is certainly in competition with the greatest dramas ever written. Ishmael as the narrator, and Ahab when he steps up on the stage is truly sublime. Um, really, just gunning right for the top. Like Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost has some incredible lines, and Milton is an unbelievable poet. The way he plays. I had a teacher once who said Milton plays the whole organ, and he really does. Like some poets, they have their punchlines and stuff, and Milton just rattles them off. Anytime you think he's done with something, he's just getting started. Um, but Shakespeare, I would say, is probably the biggest influence on both of them, and particularly Hamlet. Um, but just as much King Lear and Macbeth, Iago. Um, all right. So what do we want to read next? Oh, sorry. Excuse me 1 second. Oh my god. Just grab some books. I have to stretch. So. Oh. Okay. Think we're ready for the next one? And what should it be? Alright, so I've got Hart Crane, got Flannery O'Connor. I already did the King James and the I plan on reading like all these books at some point as like just a read through on this channel, but just wanted to go with some images that really stay with you, and some shorter works tonight. Okay, so this is a great short story by J.D. Salinger. It's from his book Nine Stories, which is really a fantastic one. Say probably one of the best collections of short stories I've ever read. The one after this, hopefully I'll get to it, is Flannery O'Connor, and another one just like just cranking out these beautiful short stories like nobody's business. Really, some incredible stuff. So, again, this is Down at the Dinghy by J.D. Salinger. It was a little after 4 o'clock on an Indian summer afternoon, some 15 or 20 miles since noon. Sandra, the maid, had come away from the lakefront window in the kitchen with her mouth set tight. This time, as she came away, she absently untied and retied her apron strings, taking up what little slack her enormous waistline allowed. Then she went back to the enamel table and lowered her freshly uniformed body into the seat opposite Mrs. Snell. Mrs. Snell, having finished cleaning and ironing, was having her customary cup of tea before walking down the road to the bus stop. Mrs. Snell had her hat on. It was the same interesting black felt headpiece she had worn not just all summer, but for the past 3 summers. Through record heat waves, through change of life, over scores of ironing boards, over the helms of dozens of vacuum cleaners, the Hattie Carnegie label was still inside it. Faded, but it might be said, unbowed. I'm not going to worry about it, Sandra announced for the 5th or 6th time, addressing herself as much as Mrs. Snell. I made up my mind, and I'm not going to worry about it. What for? That's right, said Mrs. Snell. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. Reach me that bag, dear. A leather handbag, extremely worn, but with a label inside it as impressive as the one inside Mrs. Snell's hat, lay on the pantry. Sandra was able to reach it without standing up. She handed it across the table to Mrs. Snell, who opened it and took out a pack of mentholated cigarettes and a fold of Stork Club matches. Mrs. Snell lit a cigarette, then brought her teacup to her lips, but he immediately set it down in its saucer. If this don't hurry up and cool off, I'm going to miss my bus. She looked over at Sandra, who was staring oppressively in the general direction of the copper saucepans lined against the wall. Stop worrying about it, Mrs. Snell ordered. What good's it going to do to worry about it? Either he tells her or he don't. That's all. What good's worrying going to do? I'm not worrying about it, Sandra responded. The last thing I'm going to do is worry about it. Only it drives you loony the way the kid goes pussyfooting all around the house. You can't hear him, you know? I mean, nobody can hear him, you know? Just the other day, I was shelling beans right at this here table, and I almost stepped on his hand. He was sitting right under the table. Well, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, you gotta weigh every word you say around him, Sandra said. It drives you loony. I still can't drink this, Mrs. Snell said. That's terrible, when you gotta weigh every word you say and all. It drives you loony. I mean it. Half the time, I'm half loony. Sandra brushed some imaginary crumbs off her lap and snorted. A 4-year-old kid. He's kind of good. He's kind of a good-looking kid, said Mrs. Snell. Them big brown eyes and all. Sandra snorted. He's gonna have a nose just like the father. She raised her cup and drank from it without any difficulty. I don't know what they want to stay up here all October for, she said malcontentedly, lowering her cup. I mean, none of them even go anywhere near the water now. She don't go in, he don't go in, and the kid don't go in. Nobody goes in now. Don't even take that crazy boat out no more. I don't know what they threw good money away on it for. I don't know how you can drink yours. I can't even drink mine. Sandra stared rancorously at the opposite wall. I'll be so glad getting back to the city. I'm not fooling. I hate this crazy place. She gave Mrs. Snell a hostile glance. It's all right for you. You live here all year round. You got your social life here and all. You don't care. I'm going to drink this if it kills me, Mrs. Snell said. Look at the clock. Looking at the clock over the electric stove. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Sandra asked abruptly. I mean, what would you do? Tell the truth. This was the sort of question Mrs. Snell slipped into as if it were an ermine coat. She at once let go of her teacup. "Well, in the first place," she said, "I wouldn't worry about it. What I'd do, I'd look around for another—" "I'm not worried about it," Sandra interrupted. I know that. But what I'd do, I'd just get me—" The swinging door opened from the dining room, and Boo Boo Tannenbaum, the lady of the house, came into the kitchen. She was a small, almost hipless girl of 25, with styleless, colorless, brittle hair pushed back behind her ears, which were very large. She was dressed in knee-length jeans, a black turtleneck pullover, and socks and loafers. Her joke of a name aside, her general unprettiness aside, she was, in terms of permanently memorable, immoderately perceptive, small area faces, a stunning and final girl. She went directly to the refrigerator and opened it, and she peered inside with her legs apart and hands on her knees. She whistled, unmelodically, through her teeth, keeping time with the little uninhibited pendulum action at her rear end. Sandra and Mrs. Snell were silent. Mrs. Snell put out her cigarette unhurriedly. "Sandra?" "Yes, ma'am?" Sandra looked alertly past Mrs. Snell's hat. "Aren't there any more pickles? I want to bring him a pickle." "He ate him," Sandra reported intelligently. "He ate him before he went to bed last night. There was only 2 left." "Oh, well, I'll get some when I go to the station. I thought maybe I could lure him out of that boat." Boo Boo shut the refrigerator door and walked over to look out of the lakefront window. "Do we need anything else?" she asked from the window. "Just bread. I left your check on the hall table, Mrs. Snell. Thank you." "Okay," said Mrs. Snell. "I hear Lionel's supposed to be running away." She gave a short laugh. "Certainly looks that way," Boo Boo said, and slid her hands into her hip pockets. "At least you don't run very far away," Mrs. Snell said, giving another short laugh. At the window, Boo Boo changed her position slightly, so that her back wasn't directly to the 2 women at the table. "No," she said, and pushed back some hair behind her ear. She added purely informatively, "He's been hitting the road regularly since he was 2. But never very hard. I think the farthest he ever got in the city, at least, was to the mall in Central Park, just a couple of blocks from home. The least far or nearest he ever got was to the front of our building. He stuck around to say goodbye to his father." Both women at the table laughed. "The mall's where they all go skating in New York," Sandra said very sociably to Mrs. Snell. "The kids and all." "Oh," said Mrs. Snell. "He was only 3. It was just last year," Boo Boo said, taking out a pack of cigarettes and a folder of matches from a side pocket in her jeans. She lit a cigarette while the 2 women spiritedly watched her. "Big excitement. We had the whole police force out looking for him." "They find him?" said Mrs. Snell. "Sure they found him," said Sandra with contempt. "What do you think? They found him at 11:15 at night, in the middle of, my God, February, I think. Not a child in the park, just muggers, I guess, and an assortment of roaming degenerates. He was sitting on the floor of the bandstand, rolling a marble back and forth along a crack, half frozen to death, and looking. Holy mackerel, said Mrs. Snell. How come he did it? I mean, what was he running away about? Boo Boo blew a single faulty smoke ring at a pane of glass. Some child in the park that afternoon had come up to him with the dreamy misinformation. You stink, kid. At least, that's why we think he did it. I don't know, Mrs. Snell. It's all slightly over my head. How long's he been doing it? Asked Mrs. Snell. I mean, how long's he been doing it? Well, at the age of 2.5, Boo Boo said biographically, he sought refuge under a sink in the basement of our apartment house. Down in the laundry, Naomi somebody, a close friend of his, told him she had a worm in her thermos bottle. At least, that's all we could get out of him. Boo Boo sighed and came away from the window with a long ash on her cigarette. She started for the screen door. I'll have another go at it, she said. By way of goodbye to both women, they laughed. Mildred, Sandra, still laughing, addressed Mrs. Snell. You're going to miss your bus if you don't get a move on. Boo Boo closed the screen door behind her. She stood on the slight downgrade of her front lawn, with a low, glaring, late afternoon sun at her back. About 200 yards ahead of her, her son Lionel was sitting in the stern seat of his father's dinghy, tied and stripped of its main and jib sails. The dinghy floated at a perfect right angle away from the far end of the pier, 50 feet or so beyond it. A lost or abandoned water ski floated bottom up. But there was no pleasure boats to be seen on the lake, just a stern-end view of the country, of the county launch on its way over to Leech's Landing. Boo Boo found it queerly difficult to keep Lionel in steady focus. The sun, though not especially hot, was nonetheless so brilliant that it made any fairly distant image, a boy, a boat, seem almost as wavering and refractional as a sight in water. After a couple minutes, Boo Boo let the image go. She peeled down her cigarette, army style, and then started toward the pier. It was October, and the pier boards no longer hit her in the face with reflected heat. She walked along, whistling Kentucky Babe through her teeth. When she reached the end of the pier, she squatted, her knees audible, at the right edge, and looked down at Lionel. He was less than an oar's length away from her. He didn't look up. "Ahoy," Boo Boo said. "Friend, pirate, dirty dog, I'm back." Still not looking up, Lionel abruptly seemed called upon to demonstrate his sailing ability. He swung the dead tiller all the way to the right, then immediately yanked it back to his side. He kept his eyes exclusively on the deck of the boat. "It is I," Boo Boo said. "Vice Admiral Tenenbaum, knee glass, come to inspect the spermophores." There was a response. "You aren't an admiral, lady. You aren't an admiral. You're a lady," Lionel said. His sentences usually had at least one break of faulty breath control, so that often his emphasized words, instead of rising, sank. Boo Boo not only listened to his voice, she seemed to watch it. "Who told you that? Who told you I wasn't an admiral?" Lionel answered, but inaudibly. "Who?" said Boo Boo. "Daddy." Still in a squatting position, Boo Boo put her left hand through the V of her legs, touching the pier boards in order to keep her balance. "Your daddy's a nice fella," she said, "but he's probably the biggest landlubber I know. It's perfectly true that when I'm in port, I'm a lady. That's true. But my true calling is first, last, and always the bounding." "You aren't an admiral," Lionel said. "I beg your pardon. You aren't an admiral. You're a lady all the time." There was a short silence. Lionel filled it by changing the course of his craft again. His hold on the tiller was a two-armed one. He was wearing khaki shorts and a clean white t-shirt with a dye picture across the chest of Jerome the Ostrich playing the violin. He was quite tanned, and his hair, which was almost exactly like his mother's in color and quality, was a little sun-bleached on top. "Many people think I'm not an admiral," Boo Boo said, watching him, "just because I don't shoot my mouth off about it." Keeping her balance, she took a cigarette and matches out of her side pocket of her jeans. "I'm almost never tempted to discuss my rank with people, especially with little boys who don't even look at me when I talk to them. I'd be drummed out of the bloomin' service." Without lighting her cigarette, she suddenly got to her feet, stood unreasonably erect, made an oval out of her thumb and index finger with her right hand, drew the oval to her mouth, and kazoo style sounded something like a bugle call. Lionel instantly looked up. In all probability, he was aware that the call was bogus, but nonetheless, he seemed deeply aroused. His mouth fell open. Boo Boo sounded the call, a peculiar amalgamation of tapt and reveille, 3 times without any pauses. Then ceremoniously, she saluted the opposite shoreline. When she finally reassumed her squat on the pier side, she seemed to do so with maximum regret, as if she had just been profoundly moved by one of the virtues of naval tradition closed to the public and small boys. She gazed out at the petty horizon of the lake for a moment, then seemed to remember she was not absolutely alone. She glanced venerably down at Lionel, whose mouth was still open. That was a secret bugle call that only the admirals are allowed to hear. She lit her cigarette and blew out the match with a theatrically thin stream of smoke. If anybody knew, I let you hear that call. She shook her head. She again fixed the sextant of her eye on the horizon. Do it again. Impossible. Why? Boo Boo shrugged. Too many low-grade officers around for one thing. She changed her position, taking up a cross-legged Indian squat. She pulled up her socks. I'll tell you what I'll do, though, she said matter-of-factly. If you'll tell me why you're running away, I will blow every single bugle call for you I know, all right? Lionel immediately looked down at the deck again. No, he said. Why not? Because. Because why? Because I don't want to, said Lionel, and jerked the tiller for emphasis. Boo Boo shielded the right side of her face from the glare of the sun. You told me you were all through running away, she said. We talked about it, and you told me you were all through. You promised me. Lionel gave a reply, but it didn't carry. What? Said Boo Boo. I didn't promise. Ah, yes, you did. You most certainly did. Lionel resumed steering his boat. If you're an admiral, he said, where's your fleet? My fleet. I'm glad you asked me about that, Boo Boo said, and started to lower herself into the dinghy. Get off, Lionel ordered, but without giving over to shrillness and keeping his eyes down. Nobody can come in. They can't. Boo Boo's foot was already touching the bow of the boat. She obediently drew it back up to the pier level. Nobody at all? She got back into her Indian squat. Why not? Lionel's answer was complete, but again, not loud enough. What? Said Boo Boo. Because they're not allowed. Boo Boo, keeping her eyes steadily on the boy, said nothing for a full minute. I'm sorry to hear it, she said finally. I just love to come down in your boat. I'm so lonesome for you. I miss you so much. I've been all alone in the house all day without anybody to talk to. Lionel didn't swing the tiller. He examined the grain of wood in its handle. You can talk to Sandra, he said. Sandra's busy, Boo Boo said. Anyway, I don't want to talk to Sandra. I want to talk to you. I want to come down in your boat and talk to you. You can talk from there. What? You can talk from there. No, I can't. It's too big a distance. I have to get up close. Lionel swung the tiller. Nobody can come in, she said. What? Nobody can come in. Well, will you tell me from there why you're running away? Boo Boo asked. After you promised me you were all through? A pair of underwater goggles lay on the deck of the dinghy, near the stern seat. For answer, Lionel secured the head strap of the goggles between the big and second toes of his right foot, and with a deft, brief leg action, flipped the goggles overboard. They sank at once. That's nice. That's very constructive, said Boo Boo. Those belong to your Uncle Webb. Oh, he'll be so delighted. She dragged on her cigarette. They once belonged to your Uncle Seymour. I don't care. I see that. I see you don't, Boo Boo said. Her cigarette was angled peculiarly between her fingers. It burned dangerously close to one of her knuckle grooves. Suddenly feeling the heat, she let the cigarette drop to the surface of the lake. Then she took out something from one of her side pockets. It was a package, about the size of a deck of cards, wrapped in white paper and tied with green ribbon. This is a keychain, she said, feeling the boy's eyes look up at her, just like Daddy's, but with a lot more keys on it than Daddy has. This one has 10 keys. Lionel leaned forward in his seat, letting go of the tiller. He held out his hands in catching position. Throw it, he said, please. Let's keep our seats a minute, Sunshine. I have a little thinking to do. I should throw this keychain in the lake. Lionel stared up at her with his mouth open. He closed his mouth. It's mine, he said, on a diminishing note of justice. Boo Boo, looking down at him, shrugged. I don't care. Lionel slowly sat back in his seat, watching his mother, and reached behind him for the tiller. His eyes reflected pure perception, as his mother had known they would. Here, Boo Boo tossed the package down to him. It landed squarely on his lap. He looked at it in his lap, picked it off, looked at it in his hand and flicked it, sidearm, into the lake. Then immediately looked up at Boo Boo, his eyes filled not with defiance but tears. In another instant his mouth was distorted into a horizontal figure eight, and he was crying mightily. Boo Boo got to her feet gingerly, like someone whose foot has gone to sleep in the theater, and lowered herself into the dinghy. In a moment she was in the stern seat, with the pilot on her lap. She was rocking him and kissing the back of his neck, and giving out certain information. Sailors don't cry, baby. Sailors never cry. Only when their ships go down, or when they're shipwrecked, on rafts and all, with nothing to drink except Sandra told Mrs. Snell that Daddy's a big, sloppy kike. Just perceptibly, Boo Boo flinched. But she lifted the boy off her lap and stood him in front of her and pushed back his hair from his forehead. She did, huh? She said. Lionel worked his head up and down, emphatically. He came in closer, still crying, to stand between his mother's legs. Well, that isn't too terrible, Boo Boo said, holding him between the two vices of her arms and legs. That isn't the worst that could happen. She gently bit the rim of the boy's ear. Do you know what a kike is, baby? Lionel was either unwilling or unable to speak up at once. At any rate, he waited till the hiccuping aftermath of his tears had subsided a little. Then his answer was delivered, muffled but intelligibly, into the warmth of Boo Boo's neck. It's one of those things that go up in the air, he said, with string you hold. The better to look at him, Boo Boo pushed her son slightly away from her. Then she put a wild hand inside the seat of his trousers, startling the boy considerably, but almost immediately withdrew it and decorously tucked in his shirt for him. Tell you what we'll do, she said. We'll drive to town and get some pickles and some bread, and we'll eat the pickles in the car. Then we'll go to the station and get Daddy. Then we'll bring Daddy home and make him take us for a ride in the boat. You have to help him carry the sails down, okay? Okay, said Lionel. They didn't walk back to the house. They raced. Lionel won. Just such a great story. And again, it's one of those stories you kind of reread a lot. Don't quite understand every aspect of it, but it's just beautiful, like she's really teaching her son independence. It's just like, people can say anything under the sun to try and tear you down, try and break you. But be an admiral. Don't let them. And it's sweet and it's funny too. Like he doesn't know like children, they don't know the specifics, but they know what everything means. Like he knows exactly what a shitty thing that was to say. He knows exactly how mean and fucking, what a what just a crappy thing that is to say to somebody. But he doesn't know, exactly why. But he knows it for sure, and he's 4 years old. The childish qualities in the adults, and the incredibly adult qualities in the children, Salinger, and all his books that I've read, he didn't write a ton, but Catcher in the Rye, definitely, it's great, Holden, for all his social alienation, speaks a lot better and communicates a lot better than most people these days. And of course, when you meet his younger sister, she's way more mature and understands things. She's got a better grasp on certain things than he does. And all through Nine Stories, there's all these great child characters that kind of like they're aware, but not of every tiny detail, but they always know what's going on. They're incredibly perceptive, and if I had time, I'm going to read a different author, but the story for Esme with Love and Squalor is amazing, and I think probably the best example that there is of and this one is Teddy. It's the last story in the book. Again, he mixes in a lot of tragedy. There's some like dark suggestion to it. There's a couple moments where I don't know. There's some kind of suggestion. I don't know exactly what's going on, but the uh, I don't know. It's some kind of weird Oedipal thing. That he admires her, and he's startled when his mom tucks in his shirt, but it's just um, not 100% sure exactly uh, what that means, but maybe that's a significant part of it, and trying to teach us to be exactly like the kid, to not know every detail, but we know where they stand. We know that Boo Boo's a good mom. We know that she loves the heck out of a kid, and is really going to try and she's going to teach him the right things, and um, she's going to push him to be independent and to be strong and to not let himself get torn down by the bastards. My grandfather had a great quote, and it was in Latin. I don't remember how to say it in Latin, but basically it said, "Don't let the bastards get you down." And if you want to live life, you got to know that. All right, I had a plan to read the story, but I want to make sure it's not too long before I start it. Okay, it's already 9:15, so maybe I shouldn't. 133, 117. Okay, 15 pages. Hold on 1 second, and then we'll do it up. Okay. Oh boy. All right. So there's this strange kind of religious quality in all these authors. Melville's finding it with the sea. Um, St. Paul's obviously finding it with God, and who else did we read? McCarthy is finding a kind of you know divinity among nature, and this flashing, burning bit of light surrounded by all these dangerous, to varying degrees, dangerous or horrifying creatures, and their eyes light up like the stars. All burning kind of reflections of the tree, and as far as we know, that burning is all that it there is. So God is our reality in some ways, but God is what exists, and ultimately, there's a great quote. Hope I don't get this too wrong, but it's from Nabokov, I think. It says, "The cradle rocks above an abyss, and common sense tells us that our universe exists well, between uh, that everything that we know exists in a flash of light, in between two opposing poles of eternal darkness." So, yeah, this author is Flannery O'Connor, who, if you've never read any of her stories, get on it. Very, very fascinating stories. Really, just like when I think about like Salinger or O'Connor, with all the movies and all the money that's going out, to what seems to me more independent companies. Maybe they're not, but like, why can't they make the stories a little more human? It just feels like everybody's just trying to be smart, and it's just, um, you know what? I'm actually going to cut this short. Good man is hard to find. Instead, we will just read a little bit of the bridge. All right. If you've been on this channel, you probably heard uh, me reading this one before. This is from Hart Crane's The Bridge, and this is To Brooklyn Bridge. Again, remember those images, the burning tree and blood meridian, this kind of divine maker destroyer balance of exactly what divinity can be found in reality. How many dawns chill from his rippling rest? The seagull's wings shall dip and pivot him, shedding white rings of tumult, building high over the chain bay waters liberty. Then, within violet curve, forsake our eyes as apparitional as sails that cross in page figures to be filed away, till elevators drop us from our day. I think of cinemas, panoramic slates with multitudes bent towards some flashing scene, never disclosed but hastened to again, foretold to other eyes on the same screen. And thee, across the harbor, silver paced, as though the sun took step of thee, yet left some motion ever unspent in thy stride, implicitly thy freedom staying thee. Out of some subway scuttle, cell, or loft, a bedlamite speeds to thy parapets, tilting there, momently, shrill shirt ballooning, a jest falls from the speechless caravan. Down wall from girder into street noon leaks, a rip tooth of the skies acetylene. All afternoon the cloud-flown derricks turn, thy cables breathe the North Atlantic still, and obscure as that heaven of the Jews, thy guerdon. Accolade thou dost bestow, of anonymity time cannot raise, vibrant reprieve and pardon thou dost show. O harp and altar of fury fused, how could mere toil align thy choiring strings? Terrific threshold of the prophet's pledge, prayer of pariah and the lover's cry. Again the traffic lights skim thy swift unfractioned idiom, immaculate sigh of stars beating thy path, condense eternity, and we have seen night lifted in thine arms. Under thy shadow by the piers I waited, only in darkness is thy shadow clear. The city's fiery parcels all undone, already snow submerges an iron year. O sleepless as the river under thee, vaulting the sea, the prairie's dreaming sod, unto us lowliest sometimes sweep, descend, and of the curved ship lend a myth to God. So damn good. Um, so there's meaning in different, all kinds of uh, different things we could say about just about every line of this. But while reading it this time, I was touched by foretold to other eyes on the same screen, and basically that's what he's saying is that we are all the same screen. And it's the rip tooth of the it's the skies acetylene. We're all sharing the same experience. What happens to the lowliest is happening to all of us. Sort of like that. For whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Um, and every death diminishes us. And every birth and new life, gives us something more. And what else do I have? There's just so many beautiful musical moments in this single poem, and so many images that are really burned into you forever. That part, how could mere toil align thy choiring strings? just like that G sound, just like kind of holding it, and doesn't ever quite give it to you, but just acquiring strings in that ring of it, you hear the ring of the music, because he's saying that it's a harp and an altar, that the bridge and the cables of the bridge are, you know, producing this poem. And he says later, underneath thy shadow, in darkness is thy shadow clear. Um, and he says, the city's fiery parcels all undone. That is, another extension of the bridge that it's Christmas time. So he's imagining, the city almost like simultaneously like something on fire because of the bright lights from New York City in the, this was in the 20s, but guess it wasn't that different. Shining on the bridge, and he says, the city's fiery parcels all undone. That same kind of thing is, you know, destroying and creating out of that destruction, um, and again continuing, that God is this hand of fire, um, the maker and disseminator of all things, but all things holding a connection, a bridge from every one thing to every other thing. Okay, would love to keep reading tonight, but it's getting late. Hope you all enjoyed. All right, take care. Have a good night.